Hey everyone, today we're going to be doing a video walking you through me painting my Broke to Bougie build finally. I've been shooting this thing a ton. It's got about 2,000 rounds through it at this point. However, there's one major thing that it's been missing, and that is a paint job. Now, I've wanted to get it into a more or less final state before going through and committing to a paint job, and I think we're pretty much there. There's a couple things that I've changed on this I'm going to be updating you guys with in a dedicated video later on, but suffice to say, this is more or less the configuration it's going to stay in for the foreseeable future. Now, I know a lot of people out there are a little bit hesitant to take spray paint to something that they've invested a lot of time and money into, and I will say that I feel like getting to the point where you're willing to spray paint it is kind of that coming of age moment for a lot of people who get into the world of these types of firearms. And you know, some people like to turn their rifle into a canvas for the blue and red anodized parts, but when you realize that this is more than just a fashion statement for the flashy, bright anodized colors and something that is a tool for you to use to defend yourself, your family, and protect yourself from a tyrannical government, that's when you take a step, I think, in the right direction, and understanding that this tool is something that can either help you blend in or possibly give you away. So I see a lot of people who are like-minded, such as myself, who have this again for self-protection and protection from their government, who have a lot of camo clothing, plate carriers, chest rigs, hats, etc. They paint their faces, but then they walk around with a plain black stick in front of them. Maybe they'll go a little bit further and have some FDE or OD green parts built in there, but still just largely a very monocolor stick sitting in front of them, and it just never makes any sense to me. So today we're going to try to paint this in a scheme that's going to match my environment. Now, this is a type of paint scheme that I find myself doing a lot. Let me grab another example here. So for example, this is my Midwest Industries AR-10. This one is more or less a similar paint scheme to what I did with this one. Now, realistically speaking, if you live in an environment like I do, where whether it's winter or summer, the same general colors dominate the natural environment around you, most of your firearms might end up being a very similar color or paint scheme. If you live in an area where there's greater swings between arid summers, snowy or wet winters, then maybe you might want to have different camo patterns on different rifles, or possibly just repaint your rifle to match every season. That is going to be up to you. But at least in the environment where I find myself here in the Pacific Northwest, this is the pattern that I have found works really, really well here, and so that's what we're going to be doing. Now, if you wanted to go crazy with different camo patterns or paint schemes, really the sky's the limit there. You can pretty much do whatever you want. There's some really cool stencil options either available from companies like Freedom Stencils, or even like these little like silicone templates from Primary Arms. There's a bunch of options for that. This is going to be a little bit more fast and loose, just show you the method that I like to do and show you how we're going to be painting this Broke to Bougie rifle. Now, when it comes to prep, I don't do a whole lot. Really, I just kind of wipe down the outside, make sure there's no excess oil or anything on the outside that's going to affect the ability for the spray paint to adhere. And then I tape over some of the more important parts. So just the peep for the rear sight, tape over the front sight blade, over any lenses, so like my flashlight up front. I like to tape over the muzzle device, especially if it's a suppressor mount, just because I want to make sure I get good consistent lockup there, and then obviously painting over or taping over any lenses for any optics. Other than that, I just throw a magazine in the magazine well, close the dust cover, and we start painting. Oh, I also usually paint over the rubber pad on the back of the stock, just because paint doesn't typically adhere to that well, and I don't want to get it all over my clothing unnecessarily. And then you'll notice that when we do paint over the pistol grip, it's very light for the same reason. Just never likes to adhere well, so I don't want to go out of my way to have paint coming off when it's not totally necessary. So I'm going to get set up. The type of paint we're going to be using today is all going to be Krylon camo paint. I find that this just has a really good color palette for the environment I'm in. I've used Rust-Oleum in the past. That stuff works really well too. The main thing you're looking for, and the reason I like the dedicated camo colors from Rust-Oleum and Krylon is it's a nice matte finish. So you're not going to have any glossiness or shininess to it. That's kind of what we want to avoid if we want to blend in with the environment. And I have also found that it actually works really well under night vision in IR. It's not super reflective, so it's kind of a win-win there. So let's go ahead, get set up, and start painting. Now, one thing I like to do before I actually start painting on the gun is to just hit a sample spot and make sure that the paint is coming out nicely. Now this is going to be the camouflage khaki to start with. I'm just going to do just kind of stripes with the khaki. I'm not trying to cover the whole thing. When I was new to it and starting with spray painting guns, sometimes I would just do all one layer and then just kind of play around as I went on from there. However, now that I know roughly what I want in my mind, I'm just going to minimize the amount of paint that I'm spraying, as well as just increasing or limiting the layers that I'm doing so I'm not going too crazy. Again, I'm the kind of person that likes the look of wear on their rifle, so I'm totally okay with it looking a little bit scratched and beat up relatively quickly. So again, I'm not going to go crazy with a bunch of different layers, so we're just going to start here. Now, one thing you'll see me doing as I'm spraying here is kind of getting around, and I will go to the other side and paint over those same lines again, but I'm just trying to match the contours so that I don't have areas that aren't getting sprayed. You can tell if someone only ever painted from one side because there will be a lot of unpainted area exposed. So we're going to try to do as best as we can here. I know a lot of us in this world are a little bit afraid of women, but assuming you've convinced a woman to tolerate your presence for more than a few minutes, hopefully you will have your wife's or girlfriend's nail polish remover or some sort of other acetone available. If you start seeing clogging on the front of the spray paint can, make sure you clean that off with like a Q-tip with some of that nail polish remover or acetone. It'll just help it apply a lot cleaner and just set you up for success in the long run. All right, so we've got a layer of the flat dark earth down, or the khaki tan, or whatever they call it. Now we're going to go ahead and do some of the camouflage olive. Now, it's okay if you overspray into your tan. If you don't like your ratio of green to tan, you can always go back over it and kind of clean up those lines a little bit. But basically, I'm just going to now aim for the unpainted areas and try to get a nice column of this darker green in there. All right, so you can already see kind of the pattern that we're going for. Now we might try doing some other little angles in some of the larger areas, especially on the other side where you have large flat areas that are all going to be colored. But this, again, will just allow us to get a nice kind of broken up pattern, and then we're going to be layering over it with some brown, and we're going to use some burlap sack to then do offsetting colors on these large flat areas. We're going to let this dry, then we're going to flip it over, do the same thing on the other side, and then go from there. So one of the techniques I like to do before getting into the real texturing of the camo pattern is just doing some small lines of a dark contrasting color. So I've got the camouflage brown, and I just like to use like a sheet of paper or something like that just to give myself a hard edge, and then I'll pick some of the transitions between the two colors. So if we just go right here, that'll give us kind of a hard edge. This can is really hard to use. Give us a hard edge and a line to follow, and that just helps kind of give us more, I guess, natural lines they might see in nature, potentially. You know, I'm just using random words here. So we'll just do this in a couple locations down the rifle. And now see, if you can see what happened here, where I made that brown line a little bit thicker than I would have initially liked. I can just take some of the khaki and just remake that line to however I feel comfortable. So that, I think, will work as far as the streaks of brown. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to take some of this burlap sack here. I'm just going to go ahead and lay it down over where it's already wet, and where it's tan, I'm going to spray green. Where it's green, I'm going to spray tan. Make sure I have the right colors here. So I like to try to get it as close to the gun as possible. That way I get nicer lines. I'm just going to hit that a couple times. And probably do a little bit more there. And now we're trying to break up some of these larger patterns so that it doesn't look like one big solid piece. So now that I've done the tan in the green, we're going to do some of the green in the small tan spots. We'll just go ahead and flip it over. And now we'll just let it dry like this, and then we'll go ahead and talk about our results once this has a chance to dry. And there we have it, a freshly painted broke to bougie build. Again, this is something I think that's important to do, and I think once you do it once, you're gonna get a lot more comfortable doing it with things in the future. If you don't feel comfortable going straight to something like this, when I first started, I started with some Nerf guns that I had laying around, because when I was in the military, we like to have some Nerf wars. Then I just tried to do it to some like Magpul magazines, just to try some different patterns, some different techniques, before then moving on to the real thing. But again, once you've done it once or twice, you're gonna start feeling wrong when stuff isn't painted. You know, stuff like tripods, bipods, anything else accoutrement-wise that would go along with one of these. So if you decide to try it out, definitely let me know. Some other pro tips: if you're not sure that it's necessarily something you're going to be married to, worry not, because something like Citrus Strip can do a really good job removing the paint job without damaging any of the underlying components, even polymer components. So don't feel like what you're doing here is permanent. If you ever want to touch it up, you can just paint over it. You can remove the paint before repainting it. Really, whatever you feel like is going to work is going to work. So please give it a shot. Again, even if you're not doing it on the real thing, try it on something else: airsoft guns, Nerf guns, whatever you feel comfortable doing, just to get this under your belt. But I think once you take this step, you're not going to look back. So again, if this encouraged you to try it, definitely let me know. Send me links on Instagram to pictures that of stuff that you have done, or videos that you have done doing your own projects. And again, I just want to encourage us all to grow together and be a little bit more tactically minded as we move on. If you have any questions, comments, or concerns, go ahead and throw that in the comment section down below. A project like this is really affordable, but I still want to say thanks to the patrons over on Patreon for helping to make a video like this happen. Because of that, we post all our content over there early, so if anything sounds interesting or benefits to Patreon, definitely check out the links in the description down below. But as always, I hope you got something out of this video, and I really appreciate you watching.